Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm Mona Salah, I'm a general surgeon, and I'm part of the webinar and national conference teams. And today, really, I'm truly delighted and honored to be able to welcome three of the world's finest leading scholars in both Islam and medicine. Alhamdulillah. Sheikh Dr. Asim Yusuf is a practicing consultant psychiatrist with a special interest in Islamic spirituality and mental health. He is the chair of the British Board of Scholars and Imams and the chair of the Noor Habib Foundation. He has authored books on diverse aspects of Islam with a focus on classical spirituality and astronomy, as well as papers and book chapters on Islamic metaphysics and psychology. Sheikh Dr. Rafaqat Rashid is a traditional Muslim scholar, general practitioner, professional trainer, and educator. He is the co-founder of Al-Balagh Academy in Bradford and course director of many of the courses, such as its popular medical fiqh program, which I strongly, highly recommend. Dr. Rashid is an academic in the field of Islamic medical ethics and medical law, having obtained his master's from the University of Manchester on the subject of Muslim scholarly debates, and also holds the title of honorary lecturer at the University of Leeds. Dr. Asim Padela is the director of the Initiative on Islam and Medicine, professor and vice chair of Research and Scholarship, Department of Emergency Medicine, and professor of Bioethics and Humanities, Institute of Health and Equity at the Medical College of Wisconsin. Dr. Padela holds an MD from Weill Cornell Medical College, completed residency in emergency medicine at the University of Rochester, and received a master's degree in healthcare research from the University of Michigan. Prior to that, he received bachelor degrees in biomedical engineering and classical Arabic and literature from the University of Rochester. Dr. Padela is a clinician researcher with scholarly focus at the intersections of healthcare, bioethics, and religion. He has authored over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters and serves in an editorial capacity for numerous journals. In 2020, when the world needed both religiously and medically sound guidance, these three remarkable hybrid scholars worked tirelessly to provide it. And today, they will broaden your outlook and inspire you as they have done for me and countless others around the world. We're truly blessed to have them join us. For most of us, our secular allopathic training really excluded any mention of the spiritual and metaphysical components of our being. So in the coming hour, you will understand how your unique Muslim identity as a Muslim healthcare professional should impact your clinical care, and why solutions for real clinical problems require both medical and Islamic knowledge. First, each of our esteemed speakers will touch on an ethical aspect of healthcare delivery, and then they will come together at the panel and discuss practical issues. Dr. Asim Yusuf will begin with a philosophical discussion on the goal of healthcare.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Mona, can I carry on?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and Jazakallah khair for your attendance at this conference. So three of us, three musketeers, are going to be, and Mona being D'Artagnan, are going to be talking about this aspect. You know, why do imams need scholars? Why do imams need doctors, and why do doctors need imams? You know, what is the role that the religion plays in your practice, in your professional life? And the way we're going to explore it is effectively from three perspectives: what you do, how you do it, and why you do it. These are questions that a lot of the times, maybe other than the first one, what we do, often in the busyness of our clinical lives, we don't often stop and pause to consider these things. But what we're going to try to do, inshallah, over the next hour or so is really sort of take a pause, take a breath. I am a psychiatrist after all. Take a pause, take a breath, and let's just try to think a little bit deeper about what it is that we're actually doing. We are doctors. What does that mean? Does that mean that we are mechanics? You know, the car of the human pulls into the garage. We change the spark plugs. We check the tire pressure, and then we send them back out on their way again. Is that our role? What is the reason that we do what we do? And this particular, these slides are from a talk I gave with Dr. Asim Padela in Chicago a while back. So they are tangentially related. You'll excuse me for that. But what I had spoken about then is exploring the concept from my perspective of mental health. But here I'm going to focus on the health bit and ask a simple question. If I were to ask any of you, what is your job? You would say it is to restore health. Basically, that's what our role is. We are trying to restore health. The question that I would then pose is, what is health? What do you mean by health? How are we defining health? Right? To save life. Okay. Why? What is it sounds like an obvious question, but what is the advantage or what is the benefit of being alive, especially for a religious person when you know there is an afterlife to come? From a secular perspective, the question makes no sense at all. To ask the question, so health preserves life and life is a good. All right, why is life a good? Because the opposite of life is non-existence. Death equals non-existence, and clearly to continue to exist is better than to not exist. But hang on a sec, because from a theological perspective, death does not mean non-existence. It means the continuation of existence in a different form, in a different manner. So why necessarily is this life, the preservation of this life, critical? And it is critical. It's one of the foundational principles of the Sharia, the preservation of life. But what's the reason? And this is something that we as health professionals need to occasionally take a pause and think about. And it is a point at which you find that our study of medicine does not actually provide an answer to this question. All right? Why should we spend all our time preserving people's lives? Your studies of medicine assume that is a good and proceed from there without actually exploring why that is the case. When that question comes up particularly is in matters at the borders, the matters at the frontiers, end of life care, for example. Who should have access to a particular, or should a person have access, for example, to ventilator care? When you are doing a DNAR, a do not attempt resuscitation order, for example, on what basis are you saying that person X should not have resuscitation attempted, but person Y should have resuscitation attempted? On what basis are we making those decisions? We talk then about quality of life. What would that person's quality of life be were they to recover? All right. So it's not just about life, it's about quality of life. All these sorts of questions become important when you are faced with that situation. And what you often find, what we found over the last year, is that we aren't really aware from our medical training how to go about addressing this particular conundrum. And I would propose to you that this is one of the places, and my colleagues will talk about other aspects, but this is one of the places where the religious viewpoint, Islam here as a way of seeing the greater reality, a way of seeing one's ultimate reality, in which your internal reality, that is your mind, and your external reality, which is the world around you, are ensconced. all right, and are embedded. So we're going to take a quick look at this. If we can shift to the next slide, please. All right, okay. So the first question about what is health? We're here to restore health. How are we defining health exactly? And there are two basic models to define health. There's the biopsychosocial model, which psychiatrists know and love. And then there's the one that most of the rest of you know and love, which is the medical definition. The medical definition is both of these are fraught with problems. When you say you are restoring health, what do you mean? Do you mean you are removing pain? Do you mean you are restoring functionality? Do you mean you are treating a particular pathological process? Do you mean you are trying to bring a person's functioning into a narrow range, which is considered physiological? All right. The medical definition of health is very specific. It's also quite reductionist. So you may very well restore cardiac functioning to a person in whom you successfully perform resuscitation. Does that mean that you have done a good thing? If that person had a DNAR, you didn't know it, you revived them, have you done a good thing? Have you helped that person by restoring their cardiac function? Well, not necessarily. Why? Because that person may not experience well-being. That person may not experience well-being as a result of these things being sorted out, you changing out their spark plugs and so forth. All right. This is where the biopsychosocial model comes in. The biopsychosocial model is holistic. It talks about a general sense of subjective well-being. And the difference between the biopsychosocial conception and the medical conception is the difference between objective and subjective. The biopsychosocial health means you feel good. You have a sense of well-being. In Arabic, afia, the thing that we ask for. In religion, we ask for afia. The medical is very much objective. You are looking to see about functionality, urine output, liver function tests, and so forth. All right. So let's just shift on. What I'm saying is, there is an issue about the definitions of these terms, and one of these issues, especially with the medical definition, is the problem of reductionism. Reductionism is the idea that you will understand things better the closer and closer you peer to it. The more smaller you can see the units that make up the human, the better you are able to treat that person. This is from a medical perspective. It has obviously scientific definitions as well. But that is not always the case. And, there's a long philosophical discussion that I'm not going to get into that effectively amounts to the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. In a nutshell, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And any of us working in the clinical field will be aware of this. That you can talk about cellular function, you can talk about neuronal function and so forth, but there is something more to the human being than the human being a collection of bits. And this is very nicely demonstrated by the picture that's next to the microscope. And that picture is a picture of Monet's water lilies. Now this picture, if you go to see it, it's a great Rembrandt masterpiece, a masterpiece by Monet, I should say. If you go and see it, this is enormous. The painting is enormous. It covers a whole wall. This painting is made up of, if you go really close to it, it's made up of little dots. So the way that this chap has painted it, he's painted dots. When you're standing really close to it, you see all the dots, but you have no idea of the picture that's being formed. The only way you can see what he's actually drawn is if you step back and take in the whole thing. When the dots blend together and form this painting of water lilies, and that's why it's such a masterpiece. I put it to you that the human being is like this. The human being is more than the sum of his or her parts. You talk about my heart, my liver, my kidneys, and so forth, but then you talk about me, or I talk about me. And me is more than simply all of these things. Now, the religious framing very much takes into consideration the holistic human being and considers the holistic human being in context. Now, traditional medicine used to do this. Modern medicine is much more reductionist. And, they say it's special. Many of you here will be specialists. The famous joke about specialists is you know more and more about less and less until eventually you know everything about nothing. All right, and that's a very good it's a very good it really kind of problematizes this issue of reductionism quite well. So religion gives you that holistic opinion. Let's just move to the next slide, please. Okay, so here are some of the limitations of the medical model. All right, when we ask what is illness, is it damage, is it dysfunction, we might ask what is proper function. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about the function of the organs? That's easy. We know what the function of the heart is. We know what the function of the kidneys is. What's the function of the human? What's the function of the human? Well, a function of anything is to fulfill its purpose. Alexander McIntyre, a modern philosopher, once asked a question: is this a good hammer or a bad hammer? Now, you can only know the answer to the question, is this a good quality hammer or a bad quality hammer, if you know what the function of the hammer is. Then knowing the nature of a thing is not sufficient. You need to know its purpose in order to truly understand it. So what is the purpose of the human that we are trying to restore proper functioning to? Because only then will you be able to determine what proper functioning actually is. An illness being dysfunction is what we're trying to treat. So what is the purpose of the human? Is this a question that can be answered scientifically? Well, the scientific answer is that the purpose of any biological entity is to perpetuate itself. You are here to perpetuate your genes, effectively. But that's not a very satisfying answer. If we are perpetuating life, if that is our purpose, then okay, what do we mean by life? Do we mean sensory motor ability? Because that's the definition of life. And why is life a good? So you can see when you start with the question, is this person ill? And you follow the train of thought, where you end up with is this question: what is the purpose of the human? If it is to perpetuate life, what is life? And why is it a good thing to perpetuate life? Just shift to the next slide, please. Right. So from a religious perspective, so what is the nature of life? From a religious perspective, it is to have sensory motor ability. From a scientific perspective, and that's how the theologians have defined it, from a scientific perspective, it is to have sensory motor ability. What is the function of life? Well, the function of life is about harm and benefit from both religious and scientific perspectives. They are agreed as to the nature of life and the function of life, and therefore about things like health and illness. But then we come to the question of the purpose of life. What is the purpose of life? Does science seek to answer that question? No. Does religion? Yes. That is the exact purpose of religion, to answer the question, what is the purpose of life? And because this question lies at the root of questions of, is this person ill? And how should I treat them? Or why should I treat them? The religious worldview sits at the very foundation of a medical worldview. All right. Now I've explained that. I won't go any further, and I won't go into what religion says is the purpose of life. That's a topic for another day. I will say this question is explored in a lot more detail in Dr. Asim Padela's forthcoming book on Islam and biomedicine, which I would recommend to you. But I think my time is probably up, so I will leave it there. And Mona has been very polite. She has not even indicated to me in the slightest way, shape, or form that my time is up, but I'm sure it is. So I will just leave it there, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Dr. Asim Yusuf. That was enlightening as always. Now we will turn to Dr. Rafaqat Rashid, who will address the spiritual aspects of healthcare by discussing the character of a physician and Islamic healing.
الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله تعالى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And my presentation in essence will be about the the adab tabib, or the adab of the tabib, in other words, their character, the ethics, or the virtuous physician, and something about Islamic healing and how that relates to our character, or what we are supposed to be as clinicians or physicians, or anybody who works within the medical profession in healing people. Just next slide. So on the basis of this, there's a couple of statements. Some of my slides are quite heavy, but there's a point I'm going to raise with them. So, you know, read them at will or just listen to what I have to say. But there are a couple of statements that you'll find historically. Our Islamic tradition is very rich in the kind of works that have been done around healing, in a sense. So what we consider as Islamic healing has developed considerably over a number of years, a number of centuries in the Islamic tradition. And as a result of this, clearly there is always going to be an issue of ethics, because Islam, in essence, deals with the idea of ethics and bringing ethics into every paradigm of our life. So healing would quite considerably won't be one obvious domain where ethics will play that role. So we have, for example, we have Imam Razi in his Adab al-Shafi wal Munaqibahu, where he says, they, the doctors, have collected characteristics that no one else has. One, for example, there is a unanimous agreement among both the religious and the authoritative people on the preference given to their profession. So the medical profession has always been seen as a very high high profession of high social status. And in addition, the lay people have dire need for them, and they, the doctors, continuously strive to explore the unknown in knowledge and improvement of their profession, as well as their unfailing concern to make others happy and comfortable. So as Dr. Aasim was mentioning earlier on, what is the purpose of medicine? What is it that we're trying to achieve here? So doctors and people who work in the healing profession play a very, very important role in this particular domain. And I'll just compare that with the role of ulama and the role of imams and ulama, and how that compares with the role of doctors. So Imam Malik and Imam al-Tirmidhi, they express some very, very important points, which can clearly come into the whole discussion about the knowledge that we should have as expert professionals that work in the science of healing. So we have, for example, the hadith, لا يبيع في سوقنا إلا من قد تفقه في الدين. So this is a hadith narrated by Imam Malik and Imam Tirmidhi that basically says, none should trade in our market but those who have sufficient religious knowledge. Any kind of expertise, any kind of area that you have an area of knowledge and you're given a sense of accountability to work with the people, it's absolutely essential from our Islamic tradition that you must learn the ethics of ensuring that when you deliver in that profession, you're doing it in line, which is what is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imam Shafi'i mentions something which is quite important. He says, "Man arada ad-dunya fa'alayhi bil-ilm, wa man arada al-akhirah fa'alayhi bil-ilm." Says, one who, in essence, two sorts of people are indispensable to mankind: the scholars of knowledge about religion, and also knowledge is mandatory in this sense on generally anyone. So two sorts of people are indispensable to mankind: the scholars for knowledge about religion and the doctors for knowledge about bodies. So you can already see that there are many, many different statements that not only look at doctors from one particular perspective, but from the hadith, from the statement that I've already mentioned from Imam Shafi'i, he mentions that knowledge is required both in the dunya for those people who have a profession in the dunya, and also knowledge is required for us to attain the goals of the akhirah. So whoever desires the worldly benefits, knowledge is mandatory for him, and whoever desires the benefits in the hereafter, knowledge is mandatory for him. So for this reason, yes, medical knowledge is absolutely essential. But as Muslim physicians, there is something more that is required of us, which is an essential part which links us and transcends from not just the world that we live in, but also into the hereafter. Now, if we move on to the next slide. So there is a comparison. So Muslim ulama and the fuqaha. So the usul al-akhlaq, the principles of character of Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, he mentions that Muslim scholars should have this sense of hikmah, wisdom, suja'a, courage, ifa, temperance, and adl, justice. And then there's an explanation in Kitab al-Tib al-Ruhani of Abu Bakr Razi where he mentions that Muslim physicians, they should have an exemplary character. They must cultivate good moral character, good health, and be cultured in manners. They must listen more, talk less. And even in Adab al-Tabib al-Ruhawi, he mentions trained by employing good morals and actions with sympathy, mercy, gentleness, chastity, courage, generosity, justice. Do not aim for an excess of worldly riches. Don't make material gain a driver or a motivation for you to care for others or to treat others. The physician with exemplary adab is one who truly fears God. Now, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes reference to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in many different ways. لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. Indeed, in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you see the most perfect of characters. إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. Indeed, you, or the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, are of manifest, of great character. So our character is an essence not only of our spiritual nature, but also in terms of what is accepting to Allah and what makes us what we are as doctors or people who belong to this particular profession. So our character plays an absolute essential role as us playing a role as being Muslims within this particular profession. Next slide. So what does it mean to be a virtuous Muslim physician? And there are, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there is something about Tawheed, about accepting the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and how one perceives the dunya and the world that we live in on the basis of how we marvel at Allah's glory. And this plays a very, very important role in terms of how we manifest these characteristics, not only in our hearts as a person, but also in the way we practice our medicine. So there is an importance for us to understand the ethical implications of our practice. There is an importance for us to continually develop ourselves spiritually to be able to attain the level of understanding that is required of what the Islamic tradition requires.
Oh,
Assalamu
slight.
alaikum. Seems that we have lost Dr. Rafaqat.
You lost me for a short while.
Are you back?
Yeah, can you see me?
We can hear you, alhamdulillah.
Okay, a second. Okay, if you just go to the previous slide again, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please
Right.
continue.
So if you can go back to the previous slide. Yeah, okay, that's fine. I just need to, where I am. Okay, so obedience, spirituality, and having a sense that of expertise, which is, are we qualified to practice what we need to practice? These are three very, very important concepts within the whole makeup of a virtuous Muslim physician. Okay, move on to the next slide, sorry. So there's a couple of statements that are clearly alliterated by a number of different scholars. And this slide sort of elaborates on what those statements are. But generally speaking, there are two very, very important points that will arise from all these comments. One is recognizing that shifa, the element of cure, comes solely from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, we recognize that we have worldly means that lead to cure. And those worldly means are those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has full control of. And we are those agents that play a role in treating those individuals who are unwell and are ill. And as a basis of this, we must always be recognizant of the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who cures. And this must embody itself not only in our character, but also in how we speak, how we react with patients, how we engage with patients, so that they have that element of understanding that they gain. Just like ulama have a role in the community, similarly, physicians have that same role, or Muslim physicians. If you're going to move on to the next slide. I'm just going to move on quite quickly onto the next slide because I realize our time. Now, all this slide is really showing, if you just quickly, is showing that there's an element of emotional intelligence that is something that is within our control. Our cognitive capacity and our abilities are not always in our control, nor is our personality. Our personality is a sum of our experiences and our environment. But our emotional intelligence plays a very, very important role in self-development. And so emotional intelligence refers to your ability to reflect on your character, and then also to manage that, and then also to reflect on others and how to manage other people around you. Okay, just next slide. So if you look at all these elements, you'll find that when it comes to akhlaq al-tabib, the development of the character as a physician, it falls within the domain of emotional intelligence more than the other two. Carry on, continue. Next slide. So there are many, many kitabs that have been written, many books have been written in the Islamic sort of historical end, akhlaq al-tabib, which emphasize this idea of good character. Next slide. Now, these just sum up a number of different topics, but I'm just going to focus on one particular slide that really sums it all up, which is this one. Just go back one slide, sorry. And that is that Islamic Code of Medical Ethics sort of clearly identifies, and I want you to really focus on number 3, which is something that I think, if there's any message that I could carry today, that I could put to you, is that I think we lack as Muslim physicians, and that is the healthcare practitioners' duties towards the community. So if you look at the ulama's role, ulama have a very important role. They are imams in the masajid, they teach in the madaris, and they stand on the mimbar and they give their khutbah, and they basically bring people towards deen. And their role is not solely limited to their role in a masjid environment or a madrasa environment, but their role is, it becomes a life. It becomes their life. It becomes their way of life. And the same thing is to be applied to Muslim physicians. Muslim physician, you're a Muslim physician, then that is a way of life. It doesn't just extend from your 9-to-5 job. It goes beyond your 9-to-5 job. It goes in terms of the community care. You become a role model within your community. Are you engaging with charitable works? Are you somebody who goes out and heals people, not only in the physical sense, just in your surgery, but do you do this also out there in the community? Are you playing that pivotal role that is expected of you as part of what is a mandatory part of your role to play a healing role in society? Okay, move on to the next slide. Now, there's a couple of things that Dr. Asim has already elaborated on. I'm not going to go over them. I'm just going to point out one or two important things. That when we study medicine, and this is a conventional sort of medicine, we're studying natural philosophical or naturalist worldview on medicine. And Dr. Asim has elaborated on that. So biomedical science is about biology, chemistry, and physics is the kind of things that we sort of relate to. But we need to go beyond that as Muslim physicians. And if you go on to the next slide. So you have what we refer to as the material sciences. And then you also have the immaterial, which we have the Islamic understanding of them and the non-Islamic. So this is the alim al-ghaib, the alim al-ghaib, the world of the unseen, recognizing the idea of angels, recognizing the idea of other powers beyond, like the powers of healing. And so we have our understanding, which is the immaterial Islamic understanding, which goes beyond the material. And so we don't believe in things like unicorns and things like that, which are clearly not Islamic. We believe in only those things that of the unseen that land in the Islamic sphere. And how do we bring that into our practice? So if you just go on to the next slide, I'm just going to give you a bit of an idea that goes beyond the Islamic worldview. Alizi ibn Abdul Salam says that medicine is like the Sharia. It has emerged to bring about safety and good health and to prevent harm and ailments. It goes beyond the material world. For every disease there is a cure, and whenever the right medicine matches the disease, the person recovers with the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you see that speak again. It's all because of the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you have received the cure. So the credit is always due to Allah. The praise is always due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Please forgive me for interrupting you. I know you have so much wealth and knowledge to share with us, but we are running behind schedule, and
Okay, inshallah, that's no problem.
barakallah feek. Thank you.
No
And now we will move on to Dr. Padela, who will address the clinical ethics of healthcare.
بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh Rafaqat and Dr. Asim. I'm going to be short so that we can get to some of the Q&A, inshallah. If you just move ahead, Dr. Mona. So, Barakallah feek and BIMA for allowing us to be here. As a simpleton amongst these great scholars, I will share with you just a few slides so that we can have discussion on COVID-19. So, next slide, please, Dr. Mona. The whole thing. There you go. So what I believe, to try to crystallize what Sheikh Asim and Dr. Asim and Sheikh Rafaqat and Dr. Rafaqat, they carry two worlds within them, are trying to come together in this notion of how we think about bioethics, Islam, and Muslims together. So when you and I think about, as physicians, what we want to produce, that's the outcome, right? Health, afia, and at one level, that afia is related to how we are as agents, right? So you see on the slide set here, we have a Muslim doctor characterized as a cartoon, and oftentimes you hear bandied about within our conversations of those who are religiously inclined that our impetus to go into medicine is this verse of the Quran, where Allah SWT says, you know, whoever saves the life of a person says if you save the life of humankind, I should say. So this is how we go into this notion of medicine, that we want to produce benefits for mankind, particularly health. And we would like to do so in a way that we are rewarded by it, because Allah has given us great reward for saving the life of individuals. So what Sheikh Rafaqat is speaking about is adab and akhlaq, and this is about the agent. So the bottom line of the slide here says it all, that to be good, you must you must be good. Right? So go back, please. I'm still on that slide. I'll finish in a second. So the heart, or the individual, and our character is what produces the impetus to do the action, which is medicine, which then inshallah produces the outcome, which is health. This is the linearity. And so the point of our conversation today is that all of this has an Islamic dimension. As Muslims, we have to think about whether the outcome is one that the Quran and the Sunnah and the Sharia and the philosophy of Islam believes is good, right? The outcome that we produce, and how it characterizes that health. Is the action, when we think about fiqh, which I'll speak about in a second, is the action of the individual, the thing that you're doing, is that good? And then it starts with the notion that we as agents, our heart is in the right place, our intentionality and akhlaq, our comportment is good. So again, the point of the slide is that one must be good to do good and to produce good. And all those goods here are goods that Islam, right, as a tradition, as a moral tradition, as a theological tradition, considers to be good, right? So masali an-nas. So that's the point of the slide. You can move forward, Dr. Mona. So when we think about this in the clinical register, and we talk about Islamic bioethics, and that is particularly where I spend a lot of my time thinking about what that means when you bring together the word Islam and the word bioethics and try to get them into one construction. This is the way I would suggest for us to think about definitionally this concept, right? This term. It has linked to the scriptural sources and the bearers of the tradition in Islam with three components, right? The theological, and you can put in usuli kalami or maqasid there in a sense, right? Those are the ends. When you're thinking about, is the end produced, is the health produced, is the life-savingness produced, one that is good? That's where the moral vision of Islam has to say something about the ends produced. The legal register of the tradition, the fiqh literature, has to do with the action, right? Is this action one that is mubah, it is permitted, it is haram, is it, right? This is what the fiqh gets you at. And then the virtue ethics, the adabi literature, the akhlaqiyat that we think about, has to talk about the moral status of the agent. It works on a moral state. So the idea is that, again, the ends produced, the actions in which those ends are produced, and the individual themselves are all righteous. And that is what Islam has to say. So when you and I, as physicians and as healthcare practitioners, think about, okay, I just want to talk about fiqh, right? It is insufficient for an Islamic moral vision of this medicine. It's insufficient. All these three need to come together to furnish ethical guidance for Muslim patients, providers, and policymakers. And that's not just us. If we believe our tradition has something to say about how we should live our lives, then it's not just about Muslims, but it's all for humankind. Move forward, Dr. Mona. So as I said, I think for most of us at the highest level, we just think, let's go to scholars and think about fiqh and we are done. And as I have just suggested, that is insufficient, right? And you think about Islamic priorities as a physician oftentimes goes to a scholar, they issue a fatwa, and they tell you whether something is haram or something is, wajib. And they go through the Islamic textual sources at the Quran, Sunnah, they think about the maqasid, the objectives of Islamic law, or the qawa'id, legal maxims to do that. And a lot of my time is spent thinking about the limitations of fatwa literature because, next slide, Dr. Mona. Because medicine is not just fiqh, right? I mean, sorry, it's bioethics is not just fiqh. That you have an entire, as you see here in the blue part of the slide, that when we think about how we want to have a moral vision from Islam for medicine, it's not just about clinical practice. It's about the social scientific understandings of wellness, parenthood, all these other concepts that come in. What is disease? It's about the medical sciences themselves. When we're thinking about, well, is this mechanism by which we do gene therapy? We're not talking about clinical practice. We're talking about medical science. Is that one that Islam has something to say about? Or the philosophy of bioethics? We all are taught the 4 principles, right, of Georgetown, the Georgetown mantra. Is that something Islam has to offer some redressal of? And what about health policies? We're going to talk about COVID-19 vaccination shortly. And the point is, what does Islam say about health policy? When you have this entire sector of how we think about producing health in society, when we're thinking about biomedicine writ large, then you have to bring together the entire moral machinery of Islam. Fiqh, usul fiqh, adab, all together. So it cannot just be about fatwa and fiqh. All of these things come together, which is actually why doctors and physicians need each other, but more than just doctors and physicians. Move forward, Dr. Mona. So I'm just going to leave it there for a second so we can have a conversation about how Muslim physicians and jurists came together to address the COVID-19 pandemic. I will say that more about this is in a book that Dr. Asim, and he has a chapter in it already mentioned, Islamic biomedicine, is coming out in next month. And then inshallah, more about the physician-jurist relationship is in this book, Medicine Sharia, inshallah, is coming out next year, I think around June. So inshallah, both of these in more detail will be in these books that alhamdulillah, Allah gave us the benefit to edit and have chapters in. And inshallah, let's move forward to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic. So let me say 3 things and then we'll have Q&A. I guess our time is shortly up. But when we think about, move next slide, Dr. Mona. I know it's not mine.
Sorry, yes, coming.
So we're going to talk about these 3 things, and I'll stop you. Just leave that slide. No, go back. Go back. Yeah, go back. Yeah,
there's a delay.
Right here, leave it there. So when we think about what Muslim physicians and doctors and scholars came together, there's 3 things we're going to ask you to jump in a conversation about, and we'll all talk about. Inshallah, one was about mosques and Ramadan practices. You heard about BIMA, right? And here we're thinking about the Muslim community. How does our practice of our deen, meaning Salah, Ramadan, Jum'ah, all these things, is impacted by a medical catastrophe, the pandemic, right? And so we were thinking about just discussing amongst the Muslim community. When we move from there to end-of-life care decisions, saying, okay, well, how does Islam and our tradition have anything to do with the hospital setting? So we as Muslims must believe that it's not just about us and our practices, but we have something to offer the hospital setting, healthcare industry at large, how biomedicine, how health is produced in society. The last bit here is about limited resource allocation. So we move from mosques to the hospital setting to now policy. How should a government think about procuring and giving limited resources among society? So I will say to you that when you bring together fiqh, akhlaq, right, and the outcome, maqasid, or the theology of how health is produced, that you will have a full tradition that will be able to speak to not just Muslims or physicians in the hospital, but to society at large. And that is why you need physicians and jurists, as well as all other scientists, to have a conversation about society and how we should be as Muslims. So I won't go into these slides here, but we would like to talk about these things when we're all forward. Is that good, Dr. Mona? We should stop here for Q&A.
That's great. Jazakallah khair. But due to, thank you for catching up on time for us. And please forgive me again for cutting off portions of the talk. We would just like to get to some of the audience questions. So if we can move directly to that. The first question here, which I'll address just to you in turn. Dr. Asim, to what extent has our own focus or setting equalities to one side led to the COVID outcomes we have seen this year?
You know, there are two Asims on this panel, right?
Can
So
you
which
hear me?
I'd like to take that, Dr. Sheikh, Dr. Asim, or myself?
Okay, anyone can take it up. Feel free.
Well, I'll address. I think the questioner is asking about how being Muslim impacts healthcare disparities, and that we see here. And I think that Muslim practices, so by and large, in my understanding in the UK context, although in the USA, is that there are limited data, and you can say actually the same about the United States, about how Muslim communities have been impacted by COVID. And there's limited data to say that it's been because of their religious practices, right? So I think actually there was the data I saw here was that the masajid closures and the reopenings were done very appropriately. And therefore the transmission within those communities due to religious practices has not been a problem from the data standpoint. Meaning it is not that we're centers of contagion because we had some mosques open, which are now again obviously closed due to the policy presently. But the notion that Muslims are not healthy, let's say, right, that Muslims have not taken care of their health or their physical health has led to some disparities where there are heavy burdens of disease amongst populations because of their own, and it's not just Muslims, it's the South Asians, the cultural sort of notion of how we're taking care of our health. So I think that those pre-existing conditions have impacted us severely, but it is not that our religious practices that we've done, which I believe are done in a very prudent way, have impacted our disease outcomes. So I'll address it as that.
Barakallah feek. Thank you so much. Dr. Rafaqat, there is a question for you. Can you please name the chapters of the Islamic Code of Medical Ethics again?
Okay, well, I can't do it clearly out from solely through memory, but there is a very nice slide there that has a list of all the chapters. And I don't know whether BIMA is going to allow some of our people. The
recording will be shared, inshallah.
The slides will be shared with them.
Yes.
Yeah, but generally speaking, I think it's there are a number of holistic areas that are mentioned in a number of those books. There are a number of different kitabs on this. I've just mentioned 2 to 3. But within that, it talks of the role of a physician in a number of different sort of domains. So it talks about our role in society, our role with as a one-to-one with patients, our role to in terms of what we can contribute to the science of medicine, and also it talks quite considerably about our theology and how our theology interacts with our practice. So the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how that sort of comes into the whole foreplay in terms of how we interact with patients. So it addresses a lot of those issues. In fact, a lot of them do go into a lot of philosophical discussions. So it is quite intense. But yeah, inshallah, you'll receive the slides. So it'll all be there.
One more question for you, Dr. Rafaqat. Do you think that in addition to including alternative medicine modules within the medical school, there should be Islamic medicine courses, which would be beneficial to both Muslim medics and non-Muslims? This is a question from the audience.
I think rather than presenting it as the Islamic medical, Islamic medicine within Muslim school, into universities, but I think it's important that we understand the principles that underlie what we would consider as Islamic medicine. So there are a number of different principles, and one of them important ones sometimes that we miss out of, even though we talk about the codes of conduct of doctors, we don't always elaborate the spiritual nature of doctors, which is quite different from just the outward manifestation of your character. It sort of talks more about how your spirituality, the essence of how you perceive the world around you, and how that plays an important role in terms of how you engage with your patients, how you talk to patients, how you relate to patients, and how you become somebody who is a member of society, and not just somebody who plays a role confined to 4 walls within your medical practice. So from that perspective, I think there is a serious amount of things that are lacking within the way that we are taught morals and ethics in how we practice even conventional medicine. I think there's a lot to be brought to the curriculum and the syllabus in addressing those issues. And that is something that is encompassed. And like Dr. Asim was presenting in his talk earlier on, there is a lot of debate about how we perceive modern medicine in terms of the naturalist worldview, where it could be seen a lot more holistically. So yeah, there are a lot of things that can be added to the curriculum, not necessarily on the domain of Islam, but just generally just broadening the horizons, really.
Jazakallah khair. Now the last question is for Dr. Asim Yusuf. The question states, should Muslim physicians consider part-time work so as to be able to give back to the community more, as we work overtime in the NHS, so we have less time to give to our communities?
This is a question for me?
Yes, please, if you feel ready to answer.
The first thing, I think that we need to understand that we are giving back to communities by by mere dint of practicing our profession. I think also this question depends to a certain extent on the manner in which you're working. So if this question was addressed to somebody in private practice, the answer might be different from somebody who's working in the NHS. All right. What's important is not necessarily about how you divide your time. Of course, that is important, but the critical thing here is really about the intention with which you do what you do. So to have an intention that you are in the service of, God's creation, you're in the service of the community. When you're getting up in the morning and going to work, if that intention is sincere, when I mean sincere, that you've really thought about it, that it really starts to inform the way in which you do what you do, that you see your work as an act of service, you see it as a calling and a vocation. It will really transform the way in which you practice medicine, no matter what field you happen to be in, and no matter what specialty you happen to be in. If it is then possible for you or for anyone else to be able to give back to the community, then of course you should do so. But this will often depend on your resources, your time availability, the responsibilities towards your family, and so forth. So it's a very individual answer. But I think what relates to all of us is that we should consider what we do as an act of giving back to the community. All right. If you are in private practice, I would definitely suggest for anyone in private practice that there is an element of work that you do that is pro bono, basically. All right. And you consider something like zakat, where this is concerned. If you've got a 40-hour working week, then at least 1/40 of that, let it be zakat, right? So 1 hour of that is pro bono work. And if you can do more than that, if you can do the ushur, which is 10%, all right, which is another form of tax that we don't talk about very often, then so much the better. But there certainly should be an element of your work that is done pro bono, in which you are giving back to the community. Now, that doesn't have to be seeing a patient. It might be running a clinic. It might be teaching. It might be, training up people and that type of stuff. But we should all aim to do something along those lines, wherever possible. And it is possible for all of us. Zakat is 1/40. It is at 2.5%. It is not something you would notice in the normal course of affairs, especially when you consider we pay 30, 40, 50, 60% income tax. So the same thing applies to this resource that you have, which is your time resource.
Jazakallah khair. I think Dr. Aasim Padela would like to say a word.
Sound like I wanted to answer a question so that Dr. Mullah can close. And I want to answer it in the way, there's a question about discordance between health interventions prescribed by Imams and those prescribed by physicians. So I think it's a good way to close our panel. I would like us to think about the fact that we need a not either or approach, but and, right? So it is that if we have given anything to you, to think about the larger register under which healing occurs, right? We all recognize in ontology a schema where Allah Father sends down disease and cure and allows us to be instruments. I mean, that means that there are things which have cure and health in them, curing within them that we might not recognize. So, meaning obviously the Quran, the Hadith tells about black seed, but even dua, right? So it is not the medicine that I'm taking, but it is the capacity Allah gave within it through His divine grace that provides shifa. And it might just be dua, right? So I think that these things, we shouldn't think about, okay, the Imams are saying do this and the scholars are just saying do that, but rather we need to come together to have a more holistic recognition of all of reality, and that we must bring them together. So yes, take your medicine and do dua, and also sort of, take black seeds, all of it together. And we should recommend this not just for us. If we believe our tradition is for all of mankind or all of humankind, then it's for everybody. So with that, I would say this is also why you need physicians to inform and partner with doctors, and with fuqaha to partner with doctors. So barakallahu
And I would
feekum.
also, and I think I'd add to that this question of what you mean by Islamic medicine is absolutely critical. And I think Dr. Rafaqat, made this point very well. It's not so much a set of things to know. It is more about an attitude that is taken towards the profession, and also an attitude that is taken towards health and sickness. So a lot of prophetic medicine that you find in, and I'm really using big inverted commas here, but a lot of this prophetic medicine is either about diet or, and much more importantly, it is about your understanding of the reality of what it is that you are going through, suffering nobly, suffering illness and misfortune and calamity in a noble way, in an equanimous way, in a way that where you still have contentment with what you are undergoing, where you are seeking cure from Allah, where you are having tawakkul. This is the prophetic paradigm of health and sickness. And that is the fundamental principle. The piety of illness behavior, if you like, is the fundamental principle that you learn from the Sunnah, quite apart from black seed and honey and this and that and the other. Yeah, and I think that is something that we really need to reintroduce into, for ourselves, but also for our patients as well.
Jazakumullah khair. So really would like to thank the wealth of knowledge that they've shared with us, and obviously we need to have more sessions to delve into this subject further. But alhamdulillah, this pandemic really has brought together imams and doctors and has unified the Islamic medical associations across the world, as you'll see in our next presentation, inshallah. We do need to train Muslim healthcare leaders literate in the Islamic tradition for better patient care as well as community leadership. And during this the third session today, after the short break, Dr. Rania Awad will present the latest research data demonstrating the importance of spiritually aligning our healthcare delivery. Jazakallah khair for your attention. If you wish to learn more, you can visit the Al Balagh Academy website or the Initiative on Islam and Medicine. Please do remember to complete the feedback form. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.